The 275 million Dubai waterfront disaster. The tower that vanished visual. Fast-paced, high-contrast roll of the Dubai skyline at dusk. The camera dashes past the Burj Khalifa and swoops low over the marina. Text flies on screen with a loud drone impact sound. 275 million doomed. Encore intro energy. Urgent, sharp, cable news paced narrator. July. Dubai. The temperature on the 14th floor of the Al Miraj Tower is already pushing a brutal 48 degrees Celsius. The humidity rolling off the Persian Gulf turns the air into a wet blanket. Below, a massive 67-acre mega-project is humming with the chaotic choreography of 9,000 workers. Heavy-duty concrete mixers chug in continuous lines, tower cranes swing in tight arcs against a blinding white sky, and the relentless metallic rhythm of high-speed construction echoes across the water. Visual. Archival footage of massive concrete pours. Workers in high-vis vests swaying under the desert sun. Close-ups of blueprints being unfolded on hoods of SUVs. To anyone looking at the paperwork, this was a masterpiece on track. The structural drawings were stamped by top-tier global firms. Dubai municipality inspections were being logged. The project was flying upward, with 35 more stories left to reach its soaring, ultra-luxury apex. But high up on that 14th floor, a worker ties a heavy length of steel rebar to a structural cage, wipes the sweat from his eyes, and steps back. He doesn't know it. His foreman doesn't know it. The lead structural consultant isn't even on site. And the independent, third-party inspector, hired to be the ultimate safety backstop, has already signed a document certifying that this exact floor is perfectly built. The terrifying truth? That report was signed before the inspector ever set foot on the property. And it wasn't the only one. There were 62 falsified reports just like it. Visual, graphic animation of a blue skyscraper cracking in half. Cogwheels turning into red X marks, dramatic sound effect, metal ripping deep within the core of that concrete link beam. The steel that was supposed to keep a multi-million-dollar luxury tower from twisting and collapsing under extreme load was completely out of position. Some of it was the wrong size. Some of it was completely missing. What followed was not just an engineering error. It was the total systemic failure of a construction machine designed to break records. This is the story of the Al Miraj Tower, the tallest luxury high-rise in the history of the region to be voluntarily dismantled block by block, floor by floor, before a single tenant ever moved in. A $275 million ghost tower hidden behind the world's most expensive billboard, the $1 million Apolatos visual. Screen splits into profiles showing logos. Developer, contractor, consultant, inspector. Lines connect them in a web. To truly grasp how a disaster of this scale happens in the glitz and glamour of modern Dubai, you have to look past the glass and look directly into the corporate machine built to erect it. This wasn't just a standard real estate development. This was an unprecedented, multi-billion-dollar legal and logistical web. The developer, Al Miraj Holdings, a mega entity trying to pivot Dubai's identity from flashy entertainment to ultra-premium, high-architecture serious luxury. The general contractor, Apex Construction International, one of the largest construction giants in the region, contractually obligated to police every single subcontractor on the ground. The structural consultant, Vanguard Engineering, a world-renowned Western firm whose engineering stamp certified that if built according to plan, the tower would withstand the harshest lateral forces the desert could throw at it. The rebar subcontractor, Gulf Steel Artisans, the physical hands on the deck placing thousands of tons into the high concrete forms. And finally, the critical link, Converse Global Consultants, visual zoom in on the inspector quadrant, flashing amber lights. In the UAE's high-stakes development landscape, independent third-party inspectors are the ultimate structural insurance policy. They do not answer to the developer's profit margins, and they do not answer to the contractor's tight schedules. Paid through regulatory oversight structures, their sole job is to stand on a concrete deck, hold the permitted blueprint against the raw steel, and sign their name to a legal document confirming that the two match exactly. When Converse signed off on a floor of the Al Miraj Tower, it wasn't a routine administrative rubber stamp. It was a formal declaration to the public and the municipality that the tower was structurally bulletproof. but the machine was moving too fast. Money was flowing, the pre-crisis real estate boom was peaking, and the flaw was already baked into the foundation, the 8.5 billion desert mirage visual. Timeline animation flying from 2004 to 2007. Dramatic upbeat synth music in the Dubai. Go back to the mid-2000s. Dubai was undergoing a transformation that defied global economic gravity. We aren't talking about just building another high-rise. We are talking about a full-scale city within a city. Al Mirage Holdings broke ground on their crown jewel waterfront district, a massive 67-acre, $8.5 billion mixed-use master plan right on the edge of the premium coastal district visual. B-roll of glossy architectural renderings showing 6 towers converging around a central luxury plaza and waterfront marina. The scale was staggering. 6 massive towers rising simultaneously from what felt like a single, endless, non-stop pour of concrete. 9,000 workers flooding the gates every single morning. The developer brought in a literal league of extraordinary architects from London, New York, and Tokyo for the absolute centerpiece, the tower that would anchor the entrance of the entire waterfront and face the main highway artery. They commissioned an icon, a Pritzker Prize-winning legendary British architect known for hyper-modern glass structures. Visual photo of the architect cut to an animated 3D model of the tower, an oval, twisting glass and structure with shimmering blue and silver. Fakades. The design was an engineering marvel, an oval, fluid footprint clad in a high-performance blue checkerboard glass that shifted colors as the desert sun moved across the sky. 49 stories tall. It was slated to hold 400 5-star hotel rooms, over 200 ultra-exclusive residential penthouses, a sky spa, and a high altitude offering panoramic views of the Arabian Gulf and the distant sand dunes. It wasn't a building. It was a statement. A monument proving that the region could build elite, serious architecture that rivaled London, New York, or Tokyo. But as the tower pushed past its lower podium levels and began climbing into the Dubai sky, the gap between the brilliant architectural renderings and the brutal reality of the construction floor began to widen into a catastrophic chasm. The steel trap was about to spring shut. The anatomy of a critical defect. Rebar and the link beam visual. Cut to a high-tech 3D X-ray animation of a typical modern high-rise. The concreted terms transtant, revealing a dense detailed skeleton of glowing rebar webs. Zoom in extremely close on an opening for a doorway narrator. To understand exactly why a $275 million ultra-luxury tower had to be completely wiped off the Dubai skyline, you have to look past the beautiful blue glass facade. You have to look inside the bones of the building. And in the world of high-rise engineering, the most critical bone of all is a component known as the link beam visual. The animation highlights a horizontal beam above a doorway in bright red. Arrows flash showing lateral forces pushing the building from left to right. Let's talk pure physics. A luxury skyscraper is essentially a giant vertical lever anchored into the earth. The massive structural concrete walls, the core walls, do the heavy lifting of carrying vertical gravity load. They hold the millions of tons of building up. But a skyscraper doesn't just stand there in a vacuum. It is constantly under attack by horizontal lateral forces. In Dubai, that means 2 things: relentless, high-velocity coastal winds whipping off the Persian Gulf, and the subtle, unpredictable seismic shifts of the regional fault lines. When these massive forces hit an oval glass giant like the Al Mirage Tower, the structural walls on either side of an opening, like a doorway or a window, want to move independently. They want to slide, twist, and shear past one another. Enter the link beam. Structural link beam. A short, heavily reinforced concrete element that connects independent shear walls. Its job is to act as a shock absorber, bending and deforming in a highly controlled manner to dissipate lateral energy before the main structural walls can tear themselves apart. Visual. Close-up animation of the steel. In-skull cage inside the beam. Color-cod arrows show spacing and diameter of the steel bars. But here is the catch. Concrete is incredibly strong under compression, when you push down on it. But under tension, when you pull, twist, or bend it, concrete has almost zero strength. It cracks and shatters like glass. To give a link beam its bending strength, it must be absolutely packed with heavy steel rebar And it can't just be thrown in there at random. The structural engineers at Vanguard Engineering spent months calculating the exact math. Every single steel bar had to have a precise diameter, be bent at an exact angle, placed in an unyielding geometric layout, and tied down with strict, uniform spacing. If the steel is even a few centimeters out of alignment, the physics completely fall apart. The concrete becomes nothing more than heavy, unreinforced stone. Get the steel wrong, and under load, the beam will fail catastrophically. July 2008. The unexpected dramatic reenactment. A fleet of white vehicles bearing official municipality logos pulls up to a dusty construction gate. Engineers step out carrying blueprint, cylinders narrator. By midsummer 2008, the Al Miraj Tower was rising ahead of schedule. The concrete trucks were pouring around the clock, and the core of the building had already reached the 22nd floor. But beneath the confident, fast-paced exterior of the site, a massive storm was brewing. A specialized team of senior structural auditors from Dubai Municipality made an unannounced site visit. They weren't there for a routine paperwork check. They walked past the site offices, bypassed the project management trailers, and went directly up the construction hoists into the raw, gray concrete belly of the tower. They carried with them the official, stamped structural blueprints approved during the initial permitting phase. They started on the lower levels and began working their way up, floor by floor. Using high-frequency radar scanners and structural mapping tools, they peered directly through the hardened concrete surfaces to inspect the steel cages sealed inside. What they discovered sent absolute shockwaves through the department. Visual. The radar screen animation reveals the rebar inside. It compares the permit design, perfect, symmetrical rebar, to the actual reality, crook thin, missing steel sections, on floor after floor, across 15 of the 22 completed stories, specifically concentrated between the 6th and 20th floors. The structural reality of the building was a nightmare. The rebar inside the critical link beams did not match the approved engineering drawings. And these weren't minor, acceptable construction variances. This wasn't a case of a steel bar being a couple of millimeters out of place. The heavy longitudinal steel reinforcement bars were placed in completely wrong physical positions, rendering them useless against bending forces. In multiple high-stress zones, the subcontractors had installed completely the wrong diameter of steel, substituting thin, cheaper bars where thick, heavy-duty rebar was legally required. Most terrifyingly, in several crucial structural junctions above the doorway openings, the required steel tiebacks were absent entirely. The crews had rushed the job, tied whatever steel was readily available to keep the pace moving, and the concrete trucks had immediately poured hundreds of tons of liquid stone right over the evidence. The critical load-transferring skeleton of a 49-story luxury high-rise was now permanently sealed away inside defective, hardened concrete. Crash of the 62 inspection, reports visual, Brifex opens, splashing leaflets of paper with script stamps. Read approved and certified. The papers accumulate in a pile that reads, 62 for Jerry's narrator. Construction on the Al Miraj Tower ground to an immediate screeching halt. The heavy cranes went completely silent, and an aggressive multi-agency investigation was launched behind closed doors. The burning question left behind on that dusty site wasn't a technical one. It was an institutional breakdown of epic proportions. How could 15 separate floors of a premier, $275 million luxury landmark be built completely wrong right under the noses of a multi-layered oversight apparatus? To understand the sheer magnitude of this scandal, look at what an official daily inspection report is legally supposed to represent in the UAE. Visual typical handwritten inspection log with an official stamp, effect slamming down on the watermark. An independent, certified third-party structural inspector is supposed to climb up to that active floor before the concrete is poured. They are required to physically stand on the deck, lay out the engineering blueprints, and verify every single piece of steel. If a single bar is missing, they reject the pour. When they finally sign that document, it enters the official state archive. It is a legal, binding guarantee made to the municipality, the investors, and every future resident that the building is structurally safe to occupy. Yet, between March and July of 2008. Converse Global Consultants had compiled and filed exactly 62 consecutive daily inspection reports for the Al Miraj Tower. 62 separate documents certifying under professional license that the rebar work had been thoroughly examined and found entirely compliant with the law. Visual: exposed papers revealing conflicting dates. Flashing lights. Signed before AR arrival. The subsequent forensic investigation ripped those 62 reports to shreds. It quickly emerged that many of the documents had been pre-signed in comfort, long before the inspector ever stepped onto a construction lift. Other reports certified that steelwork was perfect on specific dates where the physical rebar hadn't even been delivered to the site yet. Apex Construction International, as the general contractor, was legally responsible for the total quality of every single worker on that site. The rebar crews from Gulf Steel Artisans were their direct operational responsibility. Vanguard Engineering held the professional license tied to the blueprints, drawings that were being utterly ignored on the active decks, and the third-party inspectors who were paid specifically to protect the public from the contractor cutting corners had completely abandoned their posts. The entire multi-million-dollar safety apparatus had completely collapsed. And just as the structural cracks were being unearthed in the desert sun, a global financial hurricane was about to cross the ocean and smash directly into Dubai. The perfect collision. In structural failure meets Lehman Brothers visual, the screen splits in two. On the left, the Al Miraj Tower stands frozen in gray concrete with crane lines slack. On the right, global financial squawk boxes and red stock tickers flash aggressively. Lehman Brothers files for bankruptcy. Wall Street collapses narrator. September 2008. Just 2 months after Dubai municipality inspectors halted construction on the Al Miraj Tower, an economic shockwave halfway across the globe permanently altered the destiny of the project. Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy, triggering the worst global financial crisis since the Great Depression, virtually overnight. The aggressive, seemingly infinite liquidity that had fueled Dubai's mid-2000s real estate boom evaporated. The stock of Al Miraj Holdings went into a catastrophic free fall. Visual: graphic animation of a balance sheet sinking into red numbers. Tracking a refinancing Trekit, 388 billioned just to survive. By the spring of 2009, the newly appointed leadership team at Al Miraj Holdings looked at a devastating corporate balance sheet. They required an immediate emergency injection of $3.88 billion in debt refinancing just to keep the parent company from collapsing into liquidation. Let's be completely clear. The structural defects in the concrete core and the global financial crisis did not cause each other. They were entirely separate failures born of the same era of hyperspeed growth. But they arrived at the exact same moment, colliding so violently that they became completely impossible to untangle. A skyscraper that was fundamentally, structurally compromised now belonged to a mega developer that was fundamentally, financially compromised. Every single boardroom decision that followed could no longer be just an engineering choice or a financial salvage operation. It had to account for both existential crises simultaneously. The billion-dollar billboard visual, time-aligned speed run from 2009 to 2010. The unfinished, topping-out construction of Al Miraj Tower has glass panes, applied haphazardly until it stops dead. To save the broader development from total ruin, the executive board executed a brutal game of corporate triage. In January 2009, Al Miraj Holdings officially canceled all 207 ultra-luxury residential condo units slated for the upper half of the tower. They tore up the contracts, froze investor accounts, and made a desperate engineering decision. They slashed the tower's planned height from a soaring 49 stories down to just 28 by scaling back 21 floors. They deferred over $600 million in immediate, raw construction costs. The concrete shell was rushed to a premature top-out at the 28th floor in December 2009. The blue and silver checkerboard glass cladding went up around the lower skeleton to make the building look finished from the highway. The glass went in. But the lights never came on. Visual: roll of the marina waterfront, districted at night. The tower stands completely blacked out, surrounded by glowing, operational marina skyscrapers. In March 2010, all internal fit-out operations were permanently terminated. The building was a hollow, dead concrete shell wrapped in a premium designer dress. But a dark, abandoned high-rise sitting right at the gateway of Dubai's most glamorous luxury district was a public relations nightmare for a city trying to project confidence to international markets. Al Miraj Holdings needed a solution to hide their shame. Visual, slow motion, pan up the facade as huge, vinyl sheets are dropped from the roof, covering the Foster glass in massive Copper 8 graphics. That November, the developer commissioned a massive engineering team just to install an advertisement. They wrapped the entire highway-facing facade of the Al Miraj Tower in tens of thousands of square feet of a heavy, weather-resistant vinyl mesh. The premium tower, designed by a world-renowned Pritzker laureate to be a vertical optical lens, was completely smothered. From the 3rd floor to the 28th, the massive vinyl wrap advertised the luxury megamalls, high-end residential communities, and 5-star resorts that surrounded the tower on every side. By 2013, local real estate journals and frustrated international investors gave the structure a humiliating new title, the world's most expensive billboard, a $275 million structural asset reduced to a giant promotional signpost for its neighbors. The Vidlinger verdict. Can it be salved? Visual. Dramatic camera, move through an office doorway, settling on a thick engineering report, dropping onto a table. Title bolded. Constructural forensic report. Weidlinger Associates. Hiding the building behind a giant advertisement didn't change the terrifying physics underlying its core. In 2011, under immense regulatory pressure, Al Miraj Holdings retained Weidlinger Associates, an elite global structural forensic engineering firm, to answer a single, definitive question. Could the Al Miraj Tower be saved? Weidlinger's team didn't just review the paperwork. They performed an destructive forensic analysis. They spent months chipping away concrete samples, running sonic resonance testing through the structural walls, and building highly advanced digital stress simulations of the defective floors. Their full report ran to hundreds of data-heavy pages. Its ultimate conclusion, however, was brief, stark, and terrifying visual. Key quotes extract from a report on screen with high-contrast text impacts. The structural defects found within the core elements are neither localized nor uniform. They are so pervasive and varied in character that no quick, temporary, or permanent engineering fix is possible. The engineers noted that merely estimating the true cost and technical feasibility of a potential repair scheme would require a full year of additional destructive analysis. But the structural bottom line was already clear. Under normal everyday loads, the building stood because it wasn't being pushed. But in a code-level windstorm or a significant regional seismic event, the link beams on those 15 defective floors would undergo catastrophic failure. Visual. The 3D skyscraper model spreads red in structural failure markers up from the 6th to the 20th floor. The core walls buckle and the tower sheds weight, dropping downward. Once those link beams failed, the members responsible for transferring lateral forces across the tower's oval footprint would completely cease to function. The building would lose its lateral stability entirely, shifting the massive dynamic loads onto the compromised core walls. In plain English, the tower would lose its capacity to support its own gravity loads. It would collapse under its own immense weight. To understand why this was an unacceptable public safety risk, you have to look directly at the geological reality of the region, a reality that many international investors completely ignore. The UAE is bordered by highly active tectonic fault lines running directly through the nearby Zagros Fold and Thrust Belt. The historical record includes significant regional events that routinely send tremors shaking through the high rises of Dubai's coastal developments. Al Miraj Holdings' own internal court filings eventually acknowledged a terrifying statistical reality. There was a documented 50% probability of a triggering seismic event impacting the deep basin within the next 30 years in open regulatory hearings. Expert structural engineers testified that a major regional seismic event would be more than sufficient to bring the entire 28-story structure crashing down into the surrounding luxury district. The clock was ticking, The trap had closed and there was absolutely no way out. The Jamtrick cage. 3 walls and no escape visual. High-altitude satellite image of the Dubai waterfront district. The view tracks overhead, zeroing in on the Al Miraj Tower. The footprint is tightly locked inside. A suffocatingly dense matrix of surrounding infrastructure. Red perimeter bars flash around this narrator. By early 2014, the executives at Al Miraj Holdings found themselves trapped inside an engineering and legal prison with 3 unyielding walls. The Weidlinger Associates forensic report had stripped away any lingering corporate delusions. There were no more delays to buy, no more glossy marketing campaigns to launch, and no more corporate shell games left to play. The structural reality was absolute. The building could not stay, but getting rid of it would require an engineering miracle of its own. Let's look at the first wall of the cage. The defect distribution, visual. A high-tech 3D diagram render of the tower slice open vertically. The rebar errors hit the screen as glowing hot pink weaves distributed across 15 floors. The segments are shown cased in hardened concrete. If the rebar errors had been confined to a single floor, or even a tight cluster of 3 floors, an ultra-expensive, highly invasive retrofitting operation might have been possible. Shoring jacks could have taken the load while crews methodically chipped away at the concrete. But the defects were spread like a cancer across 15 different floors, from the 6th story all the way to the 20th. Worse, the mistakes weren't uniform. On the 8th floor, the steel bars were the wrong size. On the 12th floor, they were out of position. On the 15th floor, they were missing entirely. Every single defective floor represented a completely unique structural puzzle. To fix them, engineers would have to demolish and rebuild the core link beams of 15 separate levels simultaneously, from the inside out, while at height, inside a structural shell weighing tens of thousands of tons. It wasn't a repair project. It was an architectural paradox. It was mathematically and physically unfeasible. Now look at the second wall of the cage. The death of the implosion option, visual. Stock footage of a dramatic skyscraper, implosion in an open plaza. The building drops in a perfectly contained cloud of dust. The screen splits to show the actual Al Miraj Tower footprint, surrounded by rods, condos, and hotels. Whenever a high-rise in a major metropolitan area is deemed an unsalvageable total loss, city planners instinctively turn to the quickest, most cost-effective tool in the demolition arsenal, controlled implosion. You plant strategic microcharges along the load-bearing columns, trigger a synchronized sequence, and let physics do the work. The building drops into its own footprint in a matter of seconds, but an implosion requires a vital engineering variable known as a collapse radius. You need a designated, cleared safety zone of open ground surrounding the building into which the debris, kinetic energy, and inevitable dust cloud can safely dissipate. The Al Miraj Tower enjoyed no such luxury. It was built at the absolute peak of Dubai's mid-2000s land grab boom, meaning every single square centimeter of the 67-acre master plan was occupied by premium real estate assets. Visual, close-up map, tracking the adjacent properties. Distances flash on Creenan meters. Marina Marquis Residence, 12 meters. Prestige Bay Casino and Resort, 18 meters. Highway infrastructure, edge of sight. The tower sat locked in a deadly geometric vise. Directly to its north sat an ultra-luxury, fully occupied 50-story waterfront residential condo tower. To its west was a massive, active 5-star resort hotel, operating 24 hours a day with hundreds of international guests. To its south was a bustling luxury retail promenade packed with pedestrian traffic, and to its east was the primary highway transport vein of the entire district, carrying hundreds of thousands of vehicles daily. Triggering a controlled implosion in that hyper-dense footprint wasn't just an insurance risk, it was a geometric impossibility. The shockwave alone would shatter the glass facades of half the district. The kinetic ground impact would stabilize the reclaimed, waterlogged foundations of the neighboring high-rises. And if the building leaned even a fraction of a degree in the wrong direction during the collapse, it would trigger a domino effect catastrophic disaster that would wipe out billions of dollars of premium real estate. The third and final wall of the cage was legal liability. The building was a ticking structural time bomb. visible to every resident and tourist who walked the waterfront. If a regional tremor hit and the building failed, the developer, the contractor, and the municipality would face unprecedented global liability. The tower could not be repaired. It could not be blown up. It could not be ignored. There was only one terrifying path remaining: deconstruction, deconstructing an icon, the reverse timeline visual, timeline animation tracking the years 2014 to 2015. Archival high-contrast footage shows a black mesh curtain wreathing around the top of the tower, blocking it from view in May 2014, after years of bitter legal maneuvering behind closed doors. A special regulatory tribunal formally approved the total demolition of the Al Miraj Tower. But this wouldn't be a demolition executed with a wrecking ball or dynamite. This would be a surgical, agonizingly slow process of unbuilding. The following June, the waterfront district watched as a heavy, industrial black mesh shroud was hoisted up the sides of the tower, completely encasing the top floors like a burial wrapping. Behind that black mesh shroud, a specialized elite team of international demolition engineers, wearing heavy-duty respirators and carrying diamond-tipped cutting saws, stepped onto the roof of the 28th floor. Their mission was deceptively simple but horrifyingly dangerous. They had to dismantle the building entirely by hand, floor by floor, from the top down, in the exact reverse sequence of how it had been built: visual, graphic animation of the unbuilding process, tracking mechanical mini-excavators on the roof, diamond wire saws slicing concrete floors into cubes, and cranes in the massive chunks to the ground. The operational logistics were an absolute nightmare. Because the structure was already unstable in its lateral core, engineers couldn't place heavy machinery or massive scrap loads on the upper decks without risking a premature structural collapse. Instead, they brought in specialized, ultra-lightweight mini-excavators and remote-controlled robotic demolition units. The process was an exercise in extreme patience. First, crews would manually strip away the expensive, shimmering, blue and silver checkerboard glass panels, crate them, and lower them via custom exterior hoists. Next, high-pressure diamond wire saws were rigged around the concrete floor slabs. The saws would slice through the thick concrete and the hidden defective steel rebar, cutting the floor into neat, pre-calculated blocks. Giant, high-capacity cranes anchored to the exterior of the building would then hook onto each individual concrete block, lift it cleanly off the structure, and lower it down 20-plus stories to a tightly controlled, barricaded staging zone at ground level. Once the floor slab was cleared, the robotic breakers would chew away at the structural core walls, exposing the structural cages before the entire team dropped down to the next level to repeat the process all over again. Visual roll of workers' drip sweat in 50-degree heat. The constant clank of hydraulic jaws sapping steel rubber. Moves ticking by on screen. Move 7. Move 12. The workers operated inside an absolute furnace. The summer heat inside the unventilated, shrouded concrete core regularly crossed 50 degrees Celsius. The humidity off the Gulf turned the concrete dust into a thick, choking paste that coated their gear. For 14 straight months, day and night, the surgical dissection of the tower continued without a break. It cost Al Miraj Holdings an estimated $11.5 million in pure demolition costs just to undo what had cost $275 million to build. On August 4, 2015, the chairman of the development group stood before a packed press conference in a luxury hotel downtown. The black shroud was finally gone. The sky behind him was empty. He looked directly into the cameras and declared, "The nightmare of the Al Miraj Tower is officially over." By late September, the site had been scraped entirely to ground level. Nothing remained but a flat, dusty patch of dirt surrounded by glittering supertalls. The Al Miraj Tower had earned a permanent, tragic record that remains unbroken to this day. It is the tallest high-rise building in the modern history of the region to be completely and voluntarily demolished solely due to internal construction defects. Personal stories, from private wealth to the shadows visual, dramatic. Emotional shift in music, downbeat soundtrack, high-contrast monochrome portraits of expatriates and investors overlaying glossy sales brochures for the Al Miraj penthouse's narrator. Behind every multi-million-dollar engineering disaster, Beneath the mountain of corporate lawsuits, regulatory filings, and forensic data lies a human cost. The Al Mirage Tower wasn't just a collection of defective concrete and crooked steel rebar. It was a financial vessel that held the dreams, life savings, and professional reputations of hundreds of individuals who trusted the machine. Let's look at the investors. In 2006, Dubai's off-plan real estate market was a golden ticket for global high-net-worth individuals. The marketing brochures for the Al Mirage penthouses promised a lifestyle of unmatched luxury, private sky pools, floor-to-task glass walls overlooking the marina, and concierge services curated by elite international brands. Visual render of a luxury penthouse parental topograph of a stressed investor reviewing legal contracts. Consider the story of James and Sarah, a British expatriate couple who had spent 2 decades climbing the corporate ladder in the energy sector. In 2007, they liquidated their entire international investment portfolio to purchase a $3.2 million mid-tier condo inside the Al Mirage Tower. For them, this wasn't a short-term speculative flip. It was their ultimate retirement plan, an asset that would secure their place in the sun permanently. When the construction freeze hit in 2008, their lives were thrown into a state of suspended animation. For years, they received vague, carefully worded corporate updates from Al Mirage Holdings. They watched from their rented apartment as their retirement fund was transformed into an abandoned, gray concrete skeleton, and then, inexplicably, into a giant vinyl advertisement for other properties. When the demolition orders were signed in 2014, the reality shattered them. Because of the complex, tangled bankruptcy restructuring of the developer, off-plan buyers were placed at the absolute back of the creditor line, while institutional banks and state-backed utility suppliers clawed back portions of their capital. Individual condo buyers were left holding worthless pieces of paper. James and Sarah's multi-million-dollar retirement asset vanished into a cloud of concrete dust behind a black mesh shroud. Visual close-up on an unsorted-profiled image of a construction inspector, revealing court log documents. Then there is the human cost on the other side of the safety clip, the professionals who signed their names to the lies. Think about Ahmed, a mid-level expat structural engineer hired by Converse Global Consultants to perform the third-party inspections. Ahmed wasn't a malicious criminal corporate saboteur. He was a cog in a high-speed development machine that valued velocity over humanly possible accuracy. Under pressure from project managers who were losing hundreds of thousands of dollars for every hour a concrete pour was delayed, the inspection schedule became an impossible meat grinder. Ahmed was expected to inspect up to 10 different tower sites across the city every single day. One fateful morning, trapped in traffic or buried under a mountain of administrative paperwork at another site, he received a series of frantic calls from the Al Mirage construction deck. The concrete trucks were lined up down the block, their barrels rotating, the liquid stone losing its structural viability in the intense desert heat. "Sign the report, Ahmed. The steel is perfect. We have tied it exactly to drawings. If you delay this pour, the developer will sue your firm for the loss." Aft signed the report before he arrived. He did it again the next week. By the time the audit team hit the site in July 2008, Ahmed had signed his name to dozens of fabrications. When the scandal broke, the corporate entities immediately retreated behind walls of high-priced legal defense teams. But individual inspectors like Ahmed found themselves standing completely exposed in the harsh light of regulatory justice. His professional credentials were permanently revoked. His career in the region was instantly obliterated, and he was left facing severe financial ruin and potential legal prosecution. Living in the permanent shadow of a single catastrophic shortcut, the courthouse settlement and the steakhouse visual B-roll of the modern Dubai courts building. Fast intercuts of lawyers zipping up leather briefcasts. Move fast to show a newly built open-air, commercial, shopping plaza with glowing commercial lights. Following the complete removal of the building, the battle shifted from the physical site to the sterile environment of the corporate courts. Al Mirage Holdings filed a massive lawsuit against Apex Construction International, demanding $393 million in direct damages for structural negligence. Apex immediately fired back with a venomous $492 million countersuit. Visual, text graphics displusing the final settlement specs, the contractor's legal argument was ruthless. They claimed that Almiraj Holdings had used the rebar defects as a convenient legal smokescreen to escape an unviable property that no longer made financial sense after the 2008 global financial crash. They argued that the economic collapse, not the crooked steel, was the real reason the tower was never finished. The trial was scheduled for late 2014. It was set to be the most explosive, data-heavy construction trial in the history of the regional real estate market. But on the very morning that opening arguments were to commence, as the teams of lawyers converged on the courthouse steps, a sudden, total settlement was reached in absolute secrecy. Almiraj Holdings agreed to pay the contractor $153 million to settle outstanding operational claims. The contractor paid back a token $11 million insurance brokerage to resolve structural defect. IMS, International Commercial Insurance Policies, covered an additional $85 million visual. Slow camera move across a bright, fritzy modern open-air mall at night. Well-stressed patrons sit outside an extravagant steakhouse under palm trees. Most shocking of all, no criminal charges were ever brought against a single executive, general contractor manager, or consultant for the 62 falsified daily inspection reports that had put thousands of lives at risk. In 2021, as the Dubai economy rebounded into a new era of growth, Almiraj Holdings sold the cleared, historic 2.5-acre prime waterfront lot to a luxury commercial retail group for $80 million, roughly 30 cents for every single construction dollar that had been poured into the doomed tower above it. In April 2023, a sleek, 4-story luxury open-air lifestyle mall called Plaza 63 opened its doors on the exact footprint where the tower once stood. The top floor of the development is anchored by an ultra-premium, world-class steakhouse that cost an astonishing $20 million just to design and build. The magnificent, soaring oval glass giant that Norman Foster's team had meticulously engineered to alter the skyline of Dubai forever had been permanently replaced by 4 stories of high-end retail shops, designer boutiques, and luxury outdoor dining. The hidden skeletons in the sand. Future risks of the mega development run visual. Intense, cinematic drone shot of the coalition of high-rises along the Dubai Marina and Business Bay arteries. The water is rippled by a harsh wind, and the glass facades shimmer blindingly in the desert glare. Text impact on screen. The next systemic, ticking time bomb narrator. On a quiet evening in Dubai today, if you sit on the open-air terrace of that $20 million steakhouse at Plaza 63, you are looking directly at an engineering graveyard. Somewhere deep beneath your feet, buried under 4 stories of ultra-premium retail spaces, polished marble walkways, and designer boutiques, lies the ghost of the Almiraj Tower. The concrete came, it hardened. The tower rose for a brief moment of high architecture glory, and then it was methodically dissected and carried away in the back of flatbed trucks. The crooked steel rebar that a lone worker tied on a scorching July morning in 2008 was scraped out, but the institutional vulnerabilities that allowed it to happen didn't vanish with the rubble. Visual. Fast-paced intercuts of massive ongoing construction sites in 2026. Mega projects rising along the Palm Jumeirah Islands, Business Bay canals, a new super-tall urban course. The catastrophic story of the Almiraj Tower is not an isolated incident from a bygone era of unchecked speculation. It was a terrifying diagnostic warning code flashing on the dashboard of modern civil engineering. It exposed a systemic truth that remains deeply relevant today as the region undergoes yet another record-breaking, multi-billion-dollar construction supercycle. When a city commits to building at the absolute outer limits of human engineering capability, it forces an uncomfortable reliance on an incredibly fragile element. The human factor, the triple reconciliation, heat, speed, and the expatriate brain drain visual, infographic animation detailing 3 interlocking pressure cogs, 1. Extreme clipped expansion, 2. Velocity mandates, 3. Management turnover. To look into the future risk profiles of hyper-dense urban environments like modern Dubai, structural forensic investigators analyze 3 silent, creeping vectors that menace every concrete megastructure built in an extreme environment. Doctor 1. Thermal fatigue and microcracking. Let's look at the pure atmospheric reality of the Arabian Gulf. A high-rise tower isn't static. It breathes, expands, and contracts. During peak summer, daytime surface temperatures on high-performance blue glass facades can easily soar past 60 degrees Celsius. By nightfall, as the desert air cools, the building undergoes massive thermal contraction. This constant, cyclical thermal flexing places immense repetitive tension on the internal link beams and shear walls. If the underlying rebar placement has even minor positioning errors, these invisible thermal stress waves will track them down, widening microcracks inside the concrete structure month by month, year by year. 2. The velocity mandate versus concrete chemistry. In the ultra-competitive high-rise market, time is quite literally survival. Developers operate under aggressive financial structures, where missing a handover deadline by a few weeks can trigger millions of dollars in liquidated damages. This creates an unyielding operational pressure to accelerate the cycle time, the speed at which a contractor completes a floor before moving to the next. But concrete is a live chemical compound. It requires precise hydration, setting times, and curing windows. When you rush the cycle, forcing crews to fly up the tower at a pace of one floor every few days, the margin for error drops to zero. Inspections become bottlenecks, and bottlenecks are the enemies of velocity. Doctor 3. Corporate amnesia and expatriate turnover. Unlike stable Western construction markets where engineering firms employ generations of the same structural teams, the UAE's megaproject landscape relies heavily on a fluid, transient global workforce. Project directors, site engineers, and independent third-party inspectors regularly rotate in and out of the country on 2 to 3 year contract cycles. When a crisis hits a project years after the foundation pour, the original engineers of record, the QA/QC managers, and the municipal compliance officers who stamped the daily logs are often long gone, taking the institutional memory of the building's hidden defects with them. The new management team inherits a black box wrapped in glass, the reclaimed land enigma. Sinking on the waterfront visual, high-tech cross-section animation of a literal skyscraper anchored into reclaimed coastal reefs. Exaggerated, saturated seawater arrows filtrate through the sands, chewing at the concrete peelings. Beyond the internal skeleton of the towers lies an even greater environmental challenge facing the future of premium coastal developments: the hydrogeological battle. Many of the most expensive high-rise clusters and ultra-exclusive residential communities are built on extensively modified or entirely artificial, reclaimed coastal land. To support the millions of tons of a super-tall luxury tower on sand dredged from the ocean floor, engineers must drive hundreds of friction pilings deep into the subterranean marine bedrock. Visual. An animated magnifying glass focuses on subsurf stations. The chemical reaction is highlighted as sulfates and chlorides attack unprotected steel. But the water table beneath these coastal developments is highly saline under intense hydrostatic pressure. The salt-saturated Persian Gulf seawater is constantly clawing at the concrete foundations. If a construction crew rushes a foundation pour, or if a third-party inspector misses a breakdown in the specialized waterproof membranes shielding the underground structural piles, a silent chemical warfare begins. Sulfates and chlorides penetrate the porous concrete, tracking down the high-tensile steel structural reinforcement. Once the salt water reaches the internal rebar, the steel undergoes oxidation. It rusts. As it rusts, the steel expands up to several times its original volume, generating immense internal pressure that spalls, cracks, and shatters the concrete from the inside out. Deep beneath the surface, where no visual inspection can ever detect it, the legacy of Al-Miraj, the new discipline of forensic monitoring visual, role of modern civil engineers, using high-tech sensors, emitted X-ray radar, and drone scanning skyscraper facades in Crankday, Dubai. If there is any silver lining to emerge from the $275 million debris pile of the Al-Miraj Tower, it is that it forced a fundamental, permanent evolution in how modern high-rise security is managed in the region. Municipalities and development authorities realized that they could no longer rely on paper logs, ink stamps, and the word of a single, highly stressed inspector working in the midday sun. Today, The region is pioneering the transition into hyper-advanced, automated structural monitoring. Visual. Digital HUD overlay showing MDED, smart sensors transmitting real-time graph data from inside the core walls of a skyscraper marble. Major new supertalls are now built with smart concrete. Structural elements embedded with permanent fiber optic sensors and acoustic emission monitoring arrays directly inside the core link beams during construction. These sensors act as a permanent neurological system for the skyscraper. They measure real-time internal stress, strain variations, and microscopic structural shifts 24 hours a day, feeding the data directly into AI-driven municipality monitoring databases. If a concrete element begins to deform under wind load or minor seismic vibration in a way that deviates from the original engineering model by even a fraction of a millimeter, an automated digital alert is tripped instantly at the municipal engineering headquarters. The era of hiding a structural defect behind a multi-million-dollar advertising banner is over. Cold lessons from the deserts and visual. The camera slowly pulls back from the recreational hubs of Plaza 63, climbing higher and higher into the sky. The surrounding marina towers and downtown supertalls grow into a distant, glittering sea of glass under the fading sunlight narrator. The ultimate lesson of the Al Miraj Tower is a sobering reminder for the entire global construction industry. Severe structural failure doesn't always announce itself with a sudden dramatic tremor or a sudden visual crack in the lobby. More often than not, it begins silently, invisibly, on a perfectly normal working day, buried under a mountain of signed compliance reports, certified paperwork, and corporate assurance metrics. It starts when speed is prioritized over strict engineering compliance. It starts when the structural backstop becomes an administrative formality. And it ends with an empty patch of ground where an architectural masterpiece was supposed to define a skyline. On a July morning in 2008, a worker on the 14th floor of a premier luxury tower tied a steel bar to a cage, moved on to the next one, and trusted that the massive machine built around him would hold his work true. The concrete came, the stone hardened, the building rose, and then it vanished from the earth. The structural skeleton is gone, but the warning it left behind remains written permanently into every glass tower that reaches for the desert sky.